And he's asking a lot of those questions, like, Mom, I'm white. Like, and I said, you know what? You have a responsibility. You have a kuleana in a mana or Hawaiian mana, or you have a kuleana. Oh, my ancestors did that. It's not my responsibility. No, you're Hawaiian, therefore you are connected. Like in the ocean, like we're talking about wayfinding and navigating. Wayfinding is exactly the concepts I use in wayfinding you use in everyday life.
What does it mean to be a wayfinder? In this episode, Gabriel and I chat with Sam and Kai to navigate how we might apply our ancestral knowledge to our daily practices. What up? Salo falava, alo uingo Estella. My pronouns are she, her, sis, and uso.
What's good, family? This is Gabriel Anthony Tanglao. Kumusta, pronouns he, him. Welcome to the Continental Shifts podcast. Today we have two incredible guests joining us from the beautiful Hawaiian Islands. Mr. Sam Kapoi, a hokulea sailor and world traveler, serial entrepreneur and community organizer. And also my teaching sister, Miss Kai Burley, a fearless educator, brilliant facilitator, and a new mother, recently bringing a beautiful baby girl into this world. Kai, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Aloha, how's it? My name is Kai. It's short for Kaihukai, which means Mist of the Ocean. My name was given to me by my grandparents, and it's to offset my twin sister, who is Kaya Ulu. She's the wind of Waianae, with the area from which I'm from. And so then I'm at the ocean, so wind and ocean, kind of that balance. Yeah, I want to mahalo you guys for inviting me onto your guys' podcast. A little bit of background about myself and how I got invited. So, right, like Gabe said, we're definitely Ohana. I met Gabe, 3 years ago at a not decolonizing. It was an NEA leadership summit. And I kind of went, put myself at him and my other good friend's table and kind of, I wouldn't want to say I wasn't invited, but I saw that they were doing a decolonizing issue, and I was like, okay, this topic is way better for me, so I'm going to sit down at this table, and hopefully I proved myself to be a part of their group or hui. But from then, Gabe and those other people that I met at the table have been my rock through my education career, and yeah, so I'm an educator, Native Hawaiian, Chinese, Portuguese, teacher, and I started my teaching path in my hometown, Waianae, and Waianae has the most Native Hawaiians in the universe, and I'm very proud of that fact. I'm an alumni of that area and of that high school, and it was just a great joy to be able to start my teaching there. Currently, I just became a brand new mom to a first beautiful Hawaiian Filipino Portuguese girl. It's my third child, my first baby, and I have two older boys. Stella too, I met her wonderful Samoan, beautiful self, again at the NEA conference, and she really helped me to push forward some API things, especially when it was like a new business item. Her and then another good brother from Hawaii, Kaleo, got to talking with her, and just so like-minded, and again very much ohana. Yeah, my background, I'm a Hawaiian studies major for my undergrad, and then a U.S. military is my graduate degree. And I just fell into teaching from my other teachers.
Kai, I love that background. You refreshed my memory on how we connected a few years ago. It was the NEA Equity Leaders Summit. And at that summit, we were all coming together, able to choose and create some of our own topics. I think we decided to create our own table around decolonizing curriculum. And you jumped right into that conversation. And from there, we went on to hosting some decolonizing curriculum retreats with our crew out there. Shout outs to Erica, John, Terry, the whole squad out there. So
Ike, Salida,
the whole team. So appreciate that refresher. And we also are joined here by Sam, who you connected with me with, Kai, when my friend EK and I were starting to host some Freestyle Friday podcasts in the midst of the pandemic. And I remember Sam came through and shared some of his wisdom and kicked some of his knowledge with us. So Sam, if you would like to, please introduce yourself to our guests and our listeners.
Aloha mai kākou, o wao o Samuel Kili'inui Kapoi, kupa aina o Wai'anai. My name is Sam Kapoi. My name was given to me by my two great-grandfathers on my mother's side, Samuel being on her mother's father's side, and Kili'inui was my mother's dad. And so Kili'inui referencing to the great chief, that name stems, deep in our family genealogy. And so it feels like, I kind of I had to live up to the name growing up. But yeah, I grew up same area as Kai, in Wai'anai on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, on the west side. Born and raised, I'm a father to 3 children. I have 3 sons and a couple stepkids, and so a daughter and a son. And I'm a serial entrepreneur out here in Hawaii. Run multiple businesses, and I was invited, by Kai to jump on that Freestyle Fridays, speaking about wayfinding and navigation, and talking about my life's journey with sailing hokulea, which is it's a canoe, traditional navigation canoe that was born in the 70s. That it was during the time of the Renaissance, and so that canoe literally changed my life in many ways. And so I was invited. That's how I got introduced to Gabe and Stella guys through Kai. And just honored to be here on this podcast. Mahalo.
Thank you, Sam. And one of the things you said around living up to our names is something that I definitely resonate with. Thinking about my name is Gabriel Anthony Tanglao is actually a tradition in my family where the eldest son is named after his father. But my name is not a junior. I'm Gabriel Anthony. So I have my own identity, my own destiny. And that's something that I do honor. So you naming that definitely refreshed my memory on how important that is for us. And that's really connected to the theme around wayfinding that we're exploring. So you did mention the hokulea sailing. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question around that for folks who may be hearing that for the first time. I know that this is tied to an ancient tradition of sailing, and I was wondering how you first got into that tradition and also what you're doing with that knowledge now. If you could speak to that, we would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, for sure. My introduction to the life of voyaging was back in high school. I truly believe, like subconsciously, right, many lives ago, it's just instilled in us, in the blood. That's how we got here to Hawaii, by way of voyaging canoes. And so in high school, in about, I think 2001 is when I was introduced to a canoe called Eala. That's the canoe, our traditional canoe in Wai'anai, that was built by our people out here for navigation. And so naturally I would flow to the mother of all canoes, which is hokulea. And so being introduced to Eala, and actually Eala means the awakening, right? It was a canoe built by our people to really wake our people up out on this side, because Hawaii struggled like any other indigenous culture out there. Westerners coming over, destroying everything, cutting out culture, language, art, and in the 70s, our kupuna or our elders were kind of fed up, with it and wanted to start this renaissance. And so hokulea was a huge part in revitalizing our traditional arts and culture and everything that fell in between those lines. It's all volunteer based, Most recently, our big voyage called the Malamahonua Worldwide Voyage. You can check it out on hokulea.com. HOKULEA.com, and see the voyage. My role on that voyage was like the younger generation leadership, and so with that, I was also a part of the documentation team, and so I kind of had the dual roles, which pretty much everybody on the canoe has. And so by documenting it and leading the next generation into this new world via the canoe was my role. And so in that particular voyage, the mission was going around the planet, spreading the good works of Malama Honua, which means to take care of the earth. It's not like we was going around to tell people how to take care of the earth. We were going around to see how people were dealing with caring for the earth, because we're only an island out here, and with the obvious changes of climate change and sea level rising, a lot of our shorelines for all little islands is diminishing rapidly, and so some islands is literally gone because of this climate change. And so by going around the world, Hokulea was that beacon to bring hope that people is trying to do the right thing to make change in this world. And so that was a 3-year long voyage, actually 4 years, and about 7 years with prepping, and so started in 2014 up into 2017. And then right now we're planning to go around the entire Pacific Rim, starting from Alaska and ending up in Russia. And so that's a kind of crazy one right now.
Fam, what I love about the way that you broke that down is we're talking about wayfinding as a concept culturally and exploring our own identities. And you're literally talking about wayfinding across the globe on these sailing, voyages. So really love that connection. And I feel like it reminds me of some conversations that Kai and I have had throughout our time being friends, educators, and comrades. And Kai, and in your experience as an educator, given your background, your life experience, your cultural roots, in what ways would you say the traditions, your ancestry, your familial background have influenced your thinking as an educator?
It's really done. It's how I think. I'm very fortunate to be one of those Hawaiians that was raised Hawaiian. Even though I have a degree in Hawaiian studies, a lot of people, and that's why I hate to lead with my degree. I shouldn't say hate. I don't really I don't really like to lead with, I'm a native Hawaiian and then my degree is in Hawaiian studies, because then a lot of people will assume, and not just the foreigners, I mean, my own people as well will assume that, this girl, she just will learn how to be Hawaiian by going to school. Because unfortunately for native Hawaiians, that's how a lot of us have to learn. Yeah, a lot of Hawaiians have to learn how to be Hawaiian. But for me, I was very fortunate to grow up in a Hawaiian home. I was raised by my mom's parents. My grandfather is Native Hawaiian Chinese, and he'll never say he's Chinese, but he's Native Hawaiian Chinese. And then my grandmother, who is Native Hawaiian Portuguese, and she will very much say that she's Native Hawaiian and Portuguese. Two different kind of mindsets you see culturally. But I was very fortunate from day one, I don't remember what it is to not be Hawaiian. I was raised with the language. I've been a hula dancer since, I can't even remember my first hula lesson from the age of 2. My grandparents tell me I started dancing at 2. Reading books. We never sat down to read like Mother Goose stories. I remember sitting down, and I don't know, Sam, if you remember that book that Herb Kane was the illustrator about Pele. Like that was my first childhood book I can remember. Pele is our goddess of the volcano. But I remember listening and reading about Hawaiian mythology and Hawaiian legends. My grandparents put Hawaiian food on the table. It wasn't something like I hear from other friends and other Ohana members and things, that like eating poi, which is our main staple, was kind of a delicacy because of it's kind of expensive now. It's not something that like how our ancestors had it, could go to it and get it anytime they wanted. It's more expensive now. It's commercialized a lot. But for me, luckily I came from a economically set ohana as well, that I was able to have fresh fish. I was able to have poi at the table. I was taught to be grateful for those things, and I was taught that it was important to know who I am and where I come from, and that I'm Hawaiian. It's funny story. When I was 4th grade, I was picked up early from school because I got into a little bit of a fight. Somebody called me a halau, which is white person or foreigner, and my grandfather picked me up, and I remember this conversation so vividly, and he's like, what happened? And I was like, this guy called me Fikin one haole, and he's like, I'm Hawaiian, I'm pure Hawaiian. And it was at like age 10 that my grandfather had to tell me, babe, you're not pure Hawaiian. And I was devastated. I was so devastated. I mean, it's my world, you know what I mean? It was like, I never met my white dad. So, but yeah, all of those things, language, hula, kupuna, aina, kalo, those things were always with me. They weren't taught to me in elementary school. They weren't taught to me in high school, in college. And as an educator, I think it became a real obstacle for me because of the advantages that I had being raised in my Hawaiian culture. It made me look at my students at first, and I always get down on myself about this. So one of the teacher that I student taught behind, Keala Watson, a great brother from Nanakuli, kind of had to tell me, like, hey, Kai, you cannot expect these students to know what you know, and you don't get disappointed when they don't know what aole means, which means no. Don't get upset that they don't know what the word kuleana means, which means responsibility, because Native Hawaiians in today's world are worried about surviving. They don't have the same advantages that some of us had to live within our culture, and I'm getting goosebumps because it was a real big awakening for me. So I think as an educator, for me, I bring my whole culture to my classroom. I don't dumb it down. I don't dilute it. Even if somebody tells me that I need to dilute it, if somebody tells me that there's other students that aren't Native Hawaiian in my classroom, I don't care. This is Hawaii. I'm a Hawaiian. The majority of the students and the people in the public school education are Hawaiian. So that's the bottom line. I'm going to bring it so that it becomes normal. The same way that I was very fortunate to have had that normal Hawaiian setting.
Thank you, sis. Something that you said that really resonated with me or stood out was that story that you and being told, hey, guess what? You're not. Well, and having to deal with that, I can definitely relate to that, being multi-ethnic, multiracial, and it always feeling like there's no space for you to, I don't know, maybe fully belong, or feeling like you at some points have to fight to belong or prove that no, this is me. This is my lineage. I have a right to this, and that definitely resonates, and I can relate so much to that. I had been called growing up a few times Palangi, which in Samoan, you're white. And I'm like, no, but wait, I'm actually not. And then finding out years later, no, actually there's some German in our family line. And I go, oh, okay. So that I felt that. And then again, you said, I'm going to bring my whole self, my whole culture to the classroom, and I'm with it. And it is something that I'm striving to do every single day, that I teach. My question to you right now, Kai, is, well, first of all, you recently had a baby, so congratulations. As we look backward and forward to future generations, where do you feel, or might you feel, that our roles as mothers, and I have a little one now, and I'm working really hard to make sure that she is fully aware of who she is as a Samoan, a Nigerian, and Black American. But where do our roles as mothers intersect with our roles as wayfinders?
That's so cool that you asked that question, because I think when I was writing my notes on what to bring to the table, I think that's the role that I was writing from. And I wrote a lot of notes on not just my kids in the classroom, but, my kids. For my kids as Native Hawaiians, and their dad is white from Florida, blonde hair, blue eye, kind white from the South, if you guys get my drift. Wonderful father, but yeah, that's his background. I think as a like I said, because of I bring my whole self to the classroom, it's definitely not just a kumu or teacher role, but an ohana member role, maybe more like an anake or an auntie. I definitely don't want to take over the makuahine role from the hale. For me, especially with my children at home, I explain to them about being Hawaiian after realizing the privilege that I've had. And I will recognize that a lot of the privilege I have with learning my culture or having it in my household has a lot to do with the other ethnic backgrounds that I come from. Definitely, my Portuguese or white background has definitely set me up for some type of success or privilege, if you want to say, we'll say privilege. But as far as wayfinding, for Indigenous people and definitely for Native Hawaiians, I think wayfinding has a lot to do with that, with knowing where you come from. We say mo'oku oho. That's one piece of it. And I try to teach my kids, you know, where you come from, where your dad come from, where do I come from, where is grandma from, where is Tutukane from. And then the other side of it, so you have mo'oku oho, and then the other side of it is kuleana, or responsibility or duty. I rarely say privilege. I only say privilege when I talk about my haole side. Yeah, when we think in terms of Native Hawaiian mana'o or thought or Indigenous thought, there is no sense of privilege. It's all kuleana. It's duty. So knowing where you come from and having that cultural understanding of kuleana, not a foreign understanding, right? It's a cultural understanding. And for Hawaiians, it is the basis of your kuleana is your kupuna, where you come from, right? And who you are now and what you're leaving to your mamo or your descendants in the future. And you, in that thought process, you don't just, it's not like compartmentalized. Like I don't tell my kids, oh, you only think in this way as you're Hawaiian. No, because you're taught to be this way, because you're taught to be Hawaiian, this mana'o goes for every single inlet that you have in your body. So this mana'o of kuleana and mo'oku oho goes to your haole genealogy. It goes towards your Chinese ancestry. It goes towards your Portuguese ancestry. And just around the same age, my son is 10, and he's going through that same kind of identity, I want to say forthcoming. And he's asking a lot of those questions, like, Mom, I'm white. Like, and I said, you know what? You have a responsibility. You have a kuleana. In a mana'o of Hawaiian mana'o, you have a kuleana. Because you're white, we're going to use that and to fulfill everything else that you need to fulfill to help your people, to help your ohana, to help your kai'ulu, to help your community. Like, don't have to look at it as a bad way, right? And in that same sense, because he's getting this other side from his dad who is white, like, you know, we're having that conversation that, oh, my ancestors did that. It's not my responsibility. No, you're Hawaiian, therefore you are connected, like in the ocean, like we're talking about wayfinding and navigating, right? It's so cool how like the mana'o that, you know, like the kind of lessons that Sam and people that like Sam, they bring into this conversation of culture. Like wayfinding is exactly the concepts that you use in wayfinding you use in everyday life, right? You use in the classroom, and you have this mana'o that we are all connected. There's no stop from past, present, and future. There's no stop from ancestor self and descendants, right? There's no stop between Hawaii, California, or Europe, right? We're all connected. You're connected to your past, present, future, to your ancestors and your descendants, and to every area around this place. And, you know, it's easy for him to understand. For my kids, it's easy for him to understand when you put it in a Hawaiian mana'o. It's just when you try to bring in all these different other kind of thoughts, like these foreign thoughts of, no, you're only responsible for yourself, or, you know, like the nuclear family, you know. But definitely as a mom, I want my sons and now my daughter to be Hawaiian. Like I said, bring their full self, and their full self is Hawaiian, no matter if they are part haole or Chinese. Their Hawaiian is what overflows into all of those different compartments.
Thank you, Kai. That was beautiful. I was like taking notes, like with all these quotables, like that, you know, not calling it privilege and even being mindful about that, because I feel like I do refer to it as privilege anytime I get a piece of information. And then listening to you share, I feel like I don't want to say owed, but my ancestral knowledge, like that's mine to own, right? Like that's mine to fully to make a part of all of me and my daughters as well. And then you said that wayfinding has a lot to do with knowing where you come from. There's a responsibility and a duty. We're all connected, right? There's no stop between the past, present, and future, which takes me straight to this question that I have for you, Sam. Why is the concept of wayfinding so relevant for this moment, for today, for our Gen Zers, Generation Z, and our students who are probably in our classrooms right now?
That's a great question. Listening to Kai, I was the total opposite. I grew up in a home that my grandmother, she was literally born in that generation or raised in a generation that it wasn't right to be Hawaiian. She was literally told by her mother, my great grandmother, that children is to be heard and not seen, which is like mind blowing nowadays, right? Because we couldn't speak the language, couldn't, dance. There were rebels, obviously that did it because they didn't care. But because of this whole Western world thing at that time, that new coming, they were trying to adapt to that culture, instead of their own. And so, for me growing up, I wasn't raised by my mother or my father. I was raised by my mother's parents, my grandparents. And I was raised, I guess, in a hardworking sense as a Hawaiian, as a Kanaka here. But on the culture and language side, totally wasn't. The only thing that was real relevant in culture was providing. My grandpa, he would teach me a lot about the ocean and fishing and all types of different fishing, throwing net, offshore fishing, and diving. And that, I guess, that was my kind of link to the ocean in the beginning, with that kind of wayfinding, right? If you're gonna go to the ocean, it's funny because of course, as a kid, you gravitate to the ocean with having fun, right? For surfing, bodyboarding, and for him, that was like a waste of time. Like if you're not gonna go to the ocean to provide, then what's the sense of going? And so, for him, instilling those kind of values and ike, right, the knowledge in me at such a young age, I think about it all the time now. Nowadays, the challenge is real. Like Kyle was mentioning earlier about just trying to survive out here, especially in Hawaii. Statistically, it's like the most expensive place to live on this planet, and especially in the U.S. And so a lot of our people stray away from that cultural connection. Because, for me, I chose to learn. It actually started around I probably was 10 or 9 that I realized that one of my cousins was going to a Hawaiian immersion school, right? Fully immersed school for our language and culture. And so when I asked my grandma and my mom, how come I'm not going to that school? Why do I have to go to our elementary school that's local here, and why not go to the other one? And they were so just negative about it. I think that is what kind of elevated or pushed me to learn more and become that again, because I guess spiritually, that was just pulling me in that path to learn, because if I don't, then who will? Like one of my kupuna told me before, she told me, "Ovai oi," right? And basically that means who are you? And that was, it's a pretty heavy question, who, and I ask myself all the time, who am I? Because just like Kai said, I thought I was just a Hawaiian, 100%. And then, because I never knew my dad until later years, probably around 10 or 11 years old, and found out, he was Samoan, German. At first I thought it was just pure Hawaiian Samoan. Then you start, digging into the layers of genealogy, mo'okuauhau, knowing who you are, and finding out you're German, part Korean, and all this, other stuff. And kuleana, the responsibility of those lineages, what is that to you? And so by returning to the core, because I'm here in Hawaii, we call it ho'i kapiko, right? Return to the center, immersing myself, just with finding out who I am as a Hawaiian, and how I can make other people realize how, I don't want to use the word, but privileged we are. You know what I mean? It's just because that's true. That's a privilege to be us, our people. That's what I believe. And at the same time, like Kai said, it is, kuleana, our duty, our responsibility to uphold the highest, because our kupuna wasn't idiots. They're to me pretty badass. Like they survived all this time to become one of the most self-sufficient peoples on this planet, in the middle of the Pacific. And so nowadays with all this distractions, we do veer off the ala, we call it, right? Of our course, and trying to find that goal, like that want, that need, that whatever it is that we're gunning for. And just in this course of this year, last year and this year. And so with that, I had to ho'i ka piko again, like realize like who I am and where I come from. And so, getting back on course, to hold the line, right? To hold that course so that I can be that example of, I guess, that role model, right? For the next generation to look up to.
Sam, I feel like I related to much of what you were sharing in terms of my own upbringing regarding assimilating to dominant culture as a first-generation Filipino-American. And in my adult life, I've now started that journey to return back to that self-discovery of my cultural roots. And I feel like what you shared just definitely resonated with me and is inspiring me to think even more deeply about who I am. That's something that's going to stick with me.
So before we wrap, or as we wrap to wrap, are there any other thoughts, feelings, notes that maybe you wanted to make sure that you shared on this episode with us today before we wrap?
I think, I just want to mahalo you guys for having me on there. And I want to mahalo my brother Sam, a true wayfinder in all sense of the word, like literal wayfinding, mana'o wayfinding, and just he brings so much to our culture and to our keiki. He didn't really mention this because, he's all ha'a and humble, but what him and his people do bring a lot to education in the sense that it gives an alternate way of learning, and not an alternate way in the sense that our children are naughty children, our Hawaiian children are naughty and they need this different way. It really brings them back to their culture, and it should really be the true way of learning. It's not their alternate way of learning, but it's our way of learning and teaching. And like Sam mentioned, the Eala, and he kind of got involved in that when I was a senior and he was a freshman. But he carries it on, and all of these people like Sam that are not in the classroom, but it's a very indigenous mana'o that the profession of educator doesn't mean that you're the only educators in this world, right? We learn from our ohana, right? And our ohana is extended to outside of the classroom, to into the community, to outside of our community, to across continents and on the U.S., like Gabriel Estella and all of you guys. Our ohana extends to all of these points, right? There's no disconnect, right, in wayfinding and navigation, and traversing is fluid once you know who you are and where you come from, right? But yeah, just mahalo to you guys, and mahalo to brother Sam Kapoi. It's so funny, my kids call him, they don't call him, like they call Uncle Gabe, Uncle Estella. They call Sam Uncle Sam Kapoi, and I tell him this all the time, and it's such a joke, because he's such a big cultural influence in the keiki. Just know who he is. Yeah, and it's just funny. So too bad Sam Kapoi. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Kai. In my genealogy, about 9 generations ago, my mother's side, he's basically my 8th generation grandfather. He was well known in Wai'anae. His name was Poi Nui. Harry George Poi was his name, and so he was known for his kalo, which is basically our older brother, right? And in our genealogy mythology in Hawaii, and his name was Haloa, and so kalo is the taro root, right? The taro plant, and he was known for his lehua, his Wai'anae lehua kalo. And so when I was doing genealogy, for me, that's what really connected, because the stories that I've heard of him was that he was one of the first, I think, or the first Hawaiian-owned businessman out here. He had his own saloon and imported fine wines and beers and spirits and stuff. And outside of his saloon was this big wine barrel filled with this prestige kalo. And people from all over Hawaii would come down here to get his kalo and his poi, which is made, poi is made, cooked mashed up kalo that is processed and or pounded and mixed with water to make poi, which was our staple, of life. And so when Kai spoke about that, it was basically the same thing for me in my house. As disconnected as I was languagely and artsy and all that stuff, I was more connected with food. Like my grandma was like the sought out Hawaiian chef, right? She would cook for all the parties and stuff. So that's what kept me connected all my life was food. And then in most recent times, for the past 10 years, I always gravitated to doing stuff with kalo, like farming and just making poi or pa'iai, which is the state before poi, before adding water. And more recently, just earlier this year, I started a business called Kalo Bombs, and we make fresh pa'iai every single day to serve it to our people.
And it's the bomb. It's the bomb.
And so with that privilege that Kyle was talking about by eating poi, because it is expensive, and not so much expensive to me, it's more just rare to get kalo, because the farming out here in Hawaii has been more kind of focused on like more Westerner kind of mentality, more than farming our traditional canoe plants that came here. And so that was my bigger drive, was to provide kalo or products of kalo in our community so that people can have access to it every single day. And so we made a dessert out of it, and it's pretty successful. I'm at the shop right now, and so after this call I gotta jump back in there. but yeah, so I just wanted to kind of touch up on that, of how I stayed connected and on that path via our older brother Haloa, which is the kalo. And so
yeah, and he like when he says Sam makes it accessible, like when he go like huli pick more like grab the huli. Yeah, Sam always giving out chances for everybody to come grab huli, and he's a very, just like he does on the Hopefully navigation, he's very much into telling our ohana that, hey, if you guys need kalo, you guys need huli, so you guys go like get started. He's always telling me like, sister, go plant in your backyard, you like kalo, right? And it is, I mean, we can all do it. Like that's the thing, right? And it's about getting back to that and having people like Sam like push us towards that kind of stuff, making it a realization and normal, yeah, and accessible. It's really good. But yeah, his kalo bombs is the bomb. I'm waiting for you to let me open up with a kind of franchise out here, Big Island. You let me know.
That's what's up. We'll make sure to leave your Instagram and all that down in the description of the episode too.
One of the first things that you learn in navigation is always to know where you come from. Literally, when you take off from that point, from your home, to remember where you come from, because just in case anything happens on that voyage, you know exactly where to go. So that's a big life lesson in any way, shape, or form. Nowadays on the phones, you can set your home on Google Maps, and so however you want to take that metaphor and apply it to your life, like super critical. Helped me a lot through my life with just knowing where home is, physical, spiritual, mental, all that stuff. And so there's a olelo no'ea, or a Hawaiian proverb that our kupuna used, was that not all knowledge is learned in one school. And that proverb alone, is basically to be open, be open and go out there and learn as much as you can, because the mind is the most powerful weapon, and by seeking other mentors, throughout the world. I was fortunate enough to have a bunch, because I wanted to learn other perspectives and point of views of how people saw this world, and how they make it work for themselves. one of my mentors told me, like, find that somebody and Xerox copy them, you know, like, and adapt them to how you want to apply that knowledge. You know, you don't have to take it exactly what they do, how they do it. Just, you know, apply what would be, in a way, a benefit for your sale plan, you know, your course of your life. And so,
yeah, just thank y'all both so much. This has been incredible. I can't wait to even run it back and re-listen and tune into some of the wisdom y'all dropped.
We want to thank our special guests, Sam and Kai, one more time for rapping with us tonight. We appreciate you both for being here, really helping us continue to build the groundwork for the Continental Shifts podcast and setting a really strong foundation with contextualizing this concept of wayfinding for us and for our listeners.
Mahalo nui, you guys.
Mahalo nui.
Afafitai Talilava, thank you for listening.
Salamat, thank you for listening. Continental Shift podcast can be found on Podbean, Apple, Spotify, Google, and Stitcher.
Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube for archived footage and grab some merch on our site.
Join our mailing list updates at conshiftspodcast.com. That's CONSHIFTS podcast.com. And follow us at con_shifts on all social media platforms.
Dope educators wayfinding the past, present, and future.
Keep rocking with us, fam. We're going to make continental shifts through dialogue, with love, and all together.
Fa'afatai. Thanks again. Tofa. Deuces.
Peace. One love.